Hang on.
Great. Any discussion of and in New Jersey cannot begin without consideration of land and labor. Land and labor acknowledgements are tangible political admissions of the ongoing violence of the settler colonial state and our own implicit participation in it. Both land and labor acknowledgements are available on our website. We read this land acknowledgement, which is offered by the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape Tribal Nation. For those who seek to honor the Lenape people and their territory, preceding an event in Lenapehoking, also known as New Jersey. The land upon which we gather is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape, called Lenapehoking. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were removed west and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of the region. The Nanticoke Lenni Lenape Tribal Nation, the Ramapo Lenape Nation, the Powhatan Lenape Nation, the Nanticoke of Millsboro, Delaware, and the Lenape of Cheswold, Delaware. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tamenend, that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine.
We also offer this labor acknowledgement, which is written by Dr. T.J. Stewart, the Assistant Professor of Higher Education and Student Affairs at Iowa State University. We must acknowledge that much of what we know of this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development through history and across time, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their ascendants, who suffered the horror of the transatlantic trafficking of their people, chattel slavery, and Jim Crow. We are indebted to their labor and their sacrifice, and we must acknowledge the tremors of this violence throughout the generations and the resulting impact that can still be felt and witnessed today. We read these statements at Gathering Ground to help make visible what has been invisible to many people, particularly people racialized as white. We acknowledge that these historical truths of the theft of people and land, enslavement, forced migration, and forced labor, and though this is our history, it must not be our future. We want to work together with all of you in disrupting this fatalistic view and creating new norms for a more equitable sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. And before I turn it over to our special guest speaker, I want to tell you a little bit about Gathering Ground for those of you that are joining us for the first time. We are a multiracial, multicultural, multi-generational, and socioeconomically diverse movement of people committed to taking action that creates thriving and equitable communities. We offer a variety of programs designed to address systemic issues and empower individuals to become agents of positive change. From community engagement initiatives to collaborative learning experiences, each program, like today's briefing, is developed and crafted with the needs of our community in mind and with the overarching goal of cultivating a culture of equity and justice. Just a quick commercial. If you can, we'd love for you to join us on June 10th and 11th for the last two workshops in our race equity training series with Whitney Parnell of Service Never Sleeps. Building Equity will be on June 10th and June 11th, and I believe Anaya just popped in the registration link in our chat. Registration is required, so please join us. And of course, check our program calendar for upcoming events and workshops. Just quickly want to recognize all the people who have been working on today's briefing. We have Anaya Brown, our Communications Associate. Alyssa Prevost is our Operation Associate and is not with us today. And of course, many of you already know Casey O'Brien, our Director of Programming. This work is made possible with the support of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, the Grunning Foundation, and PSEG. I want to thank all of you for making time in your busy schedules to be with us today. We are so excited to have with us a very good friend, Professor Miguel Robles-Durán, and I want to tell you a little bit about him before I turn it over to him. Professor Miguel Robles-Durán is an urbanist and associate professor of urbanism at the New School Parsons School of Design in New York City. He's a senior fellow at Civic City, a postgraduate design research program based at the Haute École d'Art et Design, sorry about my French, HEAD head in Geneva, Switzerland, and is a current fellow at the Center for Urban Research on Austerity in Leicester, UK, and in the Montalvo Arts Center Sally and Don Lucas Artists Residency Program in Saratoga, California. Previously, Professor Robles-Durán designed and directed the Masters in Science program in Design and Urban Ecologies at Parsons School of Design. He directed the Urban and Habitat Unit at the Berlage Institute in the Netherlands and co-directed the Civic City postgraduate program at the Zurich University of Applied Arts and Sciences, Switzerland, and the Urban Asymmetries Research Unit at the Delft School of Design in the Netherlands. In 2008, Professor Robles-Durán co-founded Cohabitation Strategies, a cooperative for socio-spatial research, design, and development based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and New York City. Parallel to his work with COSTRA, Professor Robles-Durán consults diverse state and municipal governments on issues relating to democratic urban governance and strategic urban methodologies for achieving greater spatial justice and alternative housing and property systems. His direct engagement with urban social movements and institutions has led him, among many roles, to become acting judge at the International Tribunal of Evictions, advisor to the International Alliance of Inhabitants, the Right to the City Alliance, and co-directed with the Marxist geographer David Harvey, the National Strategy Center for the Right to the Territory in the Republic of Ecuador. Professor Robles-Durán is also the host of the podcast Cities After, a production of Politics in Motion. We are so excited to have Professor Robles with us today, and we'll drop the links on how you can continue to follow Professor Robles-Durán's work. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our guest, Miguel.
Thank you very much, Maria. I don't know if I'm going to be able to live up to that false description of my work. I'm just a general, I guess, dude that is very interested in just living I guess, helping or supporting social movements, but also progressive governments to achieve, what we normally call is the right to the city. But in general, my life has been divided in different forms. I mean, one is I'm an academic. That's what sustains my daily, I guess, life. And then I've also been practicing in a lot of alternative things. And I think, Maria, you mentioned a little bit of that. So thank you very much, Maria, and all the people that are here and people that helped organize this event and so on. I'm super happy. I mean, this is what's due. I was really, I guess, excited to be talking to all of you now, because I always love talking to different audiences. And I think it's so important to expand, and continue to build networks. So what I'm going to be presenting today will go as follows. I thought of organizing this as a series of like basic points on the situations of housing justice today, and how obviously my perspective towards that is it. And I will slowly build up into what we call our propositions, or things that I have been leading in Urban Front, which is this consultancy that I will tell a little bit more about. And then as I move into that, then we're going to start to open up for the conversation. I will try to be very brief. So I apologize for not being like super deep in the sort of concepts that I will be, or the points that I will be making. But they are truly meant to give us like a framework so we can have discussions right after this. The presentation, I will show some images, and I will try to run through them quite fast. Well, I hope I basically do the best job possible for you guys in this frame. So let me see if I can. Yes. So it's on share, and I assume, I hope that this is being seen by everyone. It's a complete screen. Yes, perfect. I don't know why in Zoom, but I guess you're not seeing these. So I'm gonna title this conversation that we're gonna have as a serious side of struggle. And the first point that I want to make, just to have this out of the way, right, in terms of what has informed the work that I've been doing. It's a very interesting story, at least for me to tell, because I'm originally from Mexico City. And when I was 9, I moved to Tijuana, which is the border between San Diego and Mexico, or the US and Mexico and California. And when I moved there, I experienced like the most drastic sort of urban change that I think very few people have experienced this kind of urban change. You wouldn't need to live in these kind of areas, in which the North American Free Trade Agreement took over the most of the new economy that was being developed in Tijuana, but also how it started to destroy all the endogenous economies that existed all over Mexico, specifically around agriculture and energy and all of that. And so when I started to see this, I was in my teenage years. I was like baffled just to see how fast the transformation of Tijuana is. I'm sure all of you have heard of Tijuana because of the drug dealing and that kind of stuff that always is in the news. But what I was seeing from a perspective of being a citizen there and not being aware of the situation, I was just seeing the city becoming more, I guess, ugly. That would be the word, like actually terrible. To give you an example, is like one of the big things that transformed border cities in Mexico was a huge migration wave. And the migration wave happened through small towns in Mexico, specifically those towns that were attached to rural economies. And the reason for this is because with the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Mexico had authorized the American and Canadian companies to invest in Mexico. And basically what that means is that they will buy out a lot of farmland and they institute a lot of sort of the industrial processes that we know that happen in the United States. And by that, displacing like hundreds of thousands, and I would say millions of people over a period of around 5 years, which is a period that I experienced when I was a teenager. And so that expulsion or that, that phenomena created this mass migration to the borders. And why the border? Because this is where the new manufacturing sites that we call maquiladoras were going to happen, and which are the cheap labor, basically manufacturing goods that the Americans consume. And the phenomenon in the city was just so drastic because you had like hundreds of thousands, of people just arriving en masse. And then they were settling around the maquiladoras in kind of a slum, I guess, arrangement. Whereas you would see the manufacturing plants all, I guess, with gates all over, cameras, etc. Imagine, I don't know, at that time Amazon was not a thing, but let's imagine Sony or any other sort of corporation, and they were like very beautiful inside. They had gardens and so on, and then all of these slums around it. And that created to me the first sort of like, oh, damn, like what is happening? Like, I guess my first introduction into, oh, I am interested in urban issues. And then that slowly became the theme of my life. And I still didn't have enough tools to understand what I was seeing. So to explain a transformation that happens so fast is not easy. So in a way, the naive of me decided to study architecture because I thought I would make the city beautiful. That was my first, I guess, very young, 17 years old sort of assessment of the situation. That would be my contribution. But I realized that was not the case. And then all my postgraduate degrees, I really had started to focus a lot on the question of urbanization and a big part in housing, because it's obviously a huge part of this now. And so in my explorations, I did my first graduate degree also in an architecture school, because you don't know better. And sadly, my parents, I didn't have good coaching. And I hadn't heard of any sort of deep critique that would be more from a I guess, a socialist perspective and so on. I was very conscious of the thing, but I just didn't have the tools to understand this. And slowly, I discovered Marx, and I have to say, I became a self-taught Marxist. And so I present you a lot of my analysis has to do with Marx's view of how he saw capitalism, specifically in this case, taking over or utilizing urbanization as a means of just more accumulating more and more profit. I just got very deep into it. Maria just mentioned that I met almost more than 20 years ago, David Harvey, and we have been, which is a very famous, perhaps the most famous Marxist around globally, specifically focusing on urban issues, and we start to collaborate a lot of that. Now, I say all of this story because it is important for me to convey what is a Marxist critique, right? And I wanted to say it in the most simple form possible. A Marxist critique is when you understand the underpinnings on the layers that are below what produces the crisis that we see on the surface, right? So I guess this is a very good image for that. This is an image that I did for a project in France, actually, that I was developing. But you would see this little guy this person there with a question mark, not a question mark, exclamation mark, looking at the surface, what I call is the image of the city. And then when they look at the image of the city, that's all you see, right? You see what I saw when I was in Tijuana. Know that the city was just going, like, it was becoming terrible. When you are in New York City, what you see is that more homelessness, more people in poverty, more, I guess, infrastructures in decay and all of that. And in most cases, the majority of inhabitants just look at it this way, right? And what Marx taught me is to look at all the processes that actually were producing the material. So basically the physical part of what it is that is the city. So in short, Marx's interest in the city is not the form of the city, right? It's not the image of the city, but it is the configuration of many processes that would be political, economical, sociological, environmental, that are involved in producing the type of city that we see in this surface. So this image, that's what I tried to explain. This was done for a politician in the city of Bordeaux in France. But to explain all of these different things that were happening behind what was producing the kind of city that we were talking about. And so the Marxist critique in general is this, right? Is looking at what is behind the production of the city. So in contemporary terms, I mean, what we have seen for many years, specifically at the beginning of the 1990s, is that move towards from shelter to asset, which is the second point I have here. In the move of shelter to asset yes, we all still have an idea that the city is somehow has a lot of space for housing, and the housing is supposed to serve the shelter of people. We know that housing is a human right and all of those things, but how is it that it had shifted from becoming something that was useful to us to becoming something that is useful for financiers and capitalists at large corporations, large real estates, and so forth? And so this is basically, I guess, in a very short point, what Marx's sort of entry point into urbanization, into housing is about, right? And I think it was just so important for me to mention this. Now, as a second, I guess, thing that is that part of moving from shelter to asset, no? Is the dramatic things that we are seeing happen every month, right? This is the most recent report from, I think it's Douglas Elliman, which is one of the big real estate companies that most of the big real estate companies, they always make reports, right? And then this is, taken from the reports. I actually trust much more these kind of reports than the reports that the government does, right? Because these are made for investors. I mean, investors are seeing this, right? So they're very truthful. And just in April, but I could go, in February, I can go in 2024, I can go like back and back. But what we see today is represented, I think, in these graphs that I have here. The graphs on the right are Manhattan rentals. These are the rental prices. And the rental prices, well, what can I tell you? I mean, like, I think all of us must have an idea that is just insane, right? But the thing is that they're at the moment at an all-time high, right? So despite, and this is something I will take later, being more supply, right? So one of the things that have happened in the last years is that there's been a push for this idea that if you supply more housing, the housing prices will come down. And I will try to take out that myth. It is truly a myth. And we've seen that it just keeps on a rise. So at the moment, and this will be, I think, the same next month, it's the all-time high, right? Like, we're reaching that. So we have reached a situation where the average rental prices are just absolutely insane, above $4,000 a month for just a single room unit. And what is very interesting here is that we also have seen that the luxury median rent has not changed. So basically, if you want to buy luxury housing, which I assume there's a lot of that in New York and everywhere, I guess, it's pretty much the same price. Nevertheless, the price continues to go up, and that also gives us a clue that, well, yes, of course. I mean, all the profit that these companies are doing is profiting from us. I mean, profiting from low-income and middle-income families more than which also brings a lot of questions, which I will try to address. Another sort of great statistic for this, so it's like I don't know, it's like insane. 180,000 a year is what you would need to earn to qualify for renting an apartment in New York City, right? And that is considering these 40 times, like, you know, landlords check if you make 40 times, the rent is 40 times the amount that you earn. So this is just like completely unsustainable. And a lot of people ask this question, so how come this is happening? Because 180,000, truly, there is not a lot of people in New York City that have gotten their salaries up to be able to do that. And so over here, what I put is that the median income in New York, it's actually quite low. And this is very dramatic, right? So if that is the median income of the city, and you're charging all the rents that you have is $180,000 a year, that's like quite a huge difference. So the question that I always get posed is like, who the hell is like actually renting these things, right? Because it just sounds impossible. And that adding to that, we see one of those things in New York City that is the Bronx. The Bronx is the second highest percentage of children living in poverty in the United States. And until very, very recently, it had the poorest congressional district in the United States, which was Hunts Point. And I think one other district just made it #1, but for many years, Hunts Point was the most, I guess, poorest in all the United States. It's not just like that. So on one hand, you have a city that is based on $180,000 a year plus that you need to earn, which, yes, a lot of people do that. But on the other hand, the city itself has the second highest percentage of children living in poverty. And that means that they can get only one meal a day. So that's why school meals become so important, of course. And you can imagine the housing situation in which these kids are, right? And then another thing that has happened in the last 20 years is that New Yorkers in poverty has doubled in the national average. And the last point that I put here is that 4 in 1 cannot afford essentials. So it means like if you are in a subway, I always like to see this way. If I see 4 people, one of those 4 people cannot eat 3 meals a day, right? Let alone can actually be able to sustain a decent housing, right? Or a decent, let's say, shelter, you know, that you need to do on that. So one of the big things that I just continue like bombarding, but just not to make it about New York City, but I thought New York City was a good example because, you know, we are very close on Jersey and New York and always use as a measurement. Over half of renter households are cost burdened. So that's 50%. So if you're in a subway, 1 in 2, so if you see 2 people, one of them is rent burden. Rent burden means that you pay more than 30% of your income to housing. But this is the thing. You are paying also, there's a proportion of people that are called severely rent burdened, which are the ones that pay over half their salary in housing. And out of that is a 60% out of the cost burden people are paying more than half of what they earn, right? In Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, for example, leads in US metro areas with 62.6% of renters being rent burden. And this is also a nice data, because a lot of people, you hear that, oh, we're moving to Florida. It's just like nothing makes sense anyway. And of course, San Jose, San Francisco, I mean, the California part is, well, 90% of low income renters are burdened. And there's, as you all have read, perhaps, is that there's like a severe affordability crisis there. Indianapolis, for example, 25% of the renters are rent burdened, and a lot of them have spent also half of their income on these. And the national average, this is the United States national average, 49.7% of renter households across the U.S. are cost burdened. So half of all renters. And this is something that I also want to emphasize. When we talk about rent, we talk about that the majority of the new generations, the elderly generations, and the, I guess, more repressed groups of people are the ones that are obviously paying, like being the rent burden, right? So it's this is on top of that. And of the low-income renters, 87%, of course, are face burden. So we can go on and on and on. But from a Marxist perspective, I like to see what is behind this, right? And what is constructing these numbers that are very dramatic. I didn't put here international numbers, but that's also sometimes what I say to when I'm talking to specific countries or cities, is that this is not unique to the United States. The United States has its own specific thing, but this phenomena, you can see it all over the place, except perhaps certain countries in Asia, China being one of them, for example. But you could go to any city in Europe and you would see numbers that are very close to these. The same in Australia. And in Latin America, you also see in the main cities things at this level. The second point I want to make is that, yes, of course, I mean, I hope we all agree with these, that housing is a human right. And that idea that housing has to be seen as housing is something that we always profess, that I preach a lot. Because even people that I have met that are in the social justice or housing justice agendas, it's very difficult for us to get out of the idea that you buy a house, if you are able to afford a house, first of all. If you buy a house, you don't have to do it because it's an investment. And that's a crazy thing about American culture, that it's like people put all their money in their house for retirement. And so it's an investment, right, for most Americans. And one of the things that we tend to fight a lot and then do a lot in campaigns is that housing is to be shelter, is to be housed. And that means that it's a right. And from a Marxist perspective, he tends to divide two things about what a commodity is. And he says that a commodity can be exchanged, so the price that you pay for it. But there's a type of another property of the commodity, which is its use. He calls it use value. And so we always say, right, that the house, if anything, has to be considered a use value, something that you use, something where you eat, where you love, where you cry, where you do all the things, where you take a shower, etc. And that should not be put up a price on it. But that's something I hope we all can agree on this. One issue that happens with housing as a commodity is that housing in the last, specifically after the 2008 financial crisis, has moved into financialization. And this is kind of a new development that talks into vacancies, homelessness, and speculations. And you'll show this graph very quickly, which shows an international perspective of homelessness, just not to attack the United States completely, although, yeah, I think it's very easy to do. A lot of people don't know that the UK is the country with most homelessness in the world, actually, and some people argue that it's Germany, and Germany does not actually submit the right statistics. So there's always a debate between either the UK or Germany, because in Germany, there's a lot of homelessness. And you would see there the United States occupies, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is linked to the United Nations and so on, that the United States occupies the 6th place in homelessness, right? And so I'm not saying this, I'm not showing this to say, oh, the US is not that bad. No, it is terrible. If you see there, a lot of people are in the streets, and in other countries, people are kind of sheltered. But nevertheless, I show these just to emphasize how global is this crisis. And I will go later into talking about the financialization, the part of financialization later, and discussing that Urban Front, which is the organization that I co-founded with David Harvey and other people. Most of our focus with governments at the moment is policy fights, that touch these issues. So we have gained a lot of experience on how to actually discuss policy and write policy for governments to push that idea that housing is a human right, because it's very easy to put it in a constitution. I co-directed an research institute in Ecuador, I think Maria mentioned in my CV, together with David Harvey. And in there, the constitution actually says that housing is a human right, but it means nothing. Like you could put it in the constitution, but if you actually don't have the real instruments to implement that, yeah, and that's the same with the right to the environment, the right to nature. The other sort of points that I want to emphasize, I know I had to speed up more, sorry, I talk a lot and very fast, is that the rise of these mega landlords that come from this financialization of housing that came with the 2008 financial crisis. In this case, I call it a real estate feudalism, but we can call it so many other things. In Mexico City, they call it the real estate cartel, like a drug cartel. And basically, the idea of a mega landlord begins really in the 2008 aftermath, when a company like Blackstone started to see an opportunity, because any crisis for capitalism is a very good opportunity. They saw the opportunity of so many foreclosed homes, and they saw, damn, I mean, we can perhaps buy this from pennies on the dollar, and then let's see what we can do on it. And Blackstone itself was actually the pioneer as a company to begin to do this en masse. And it was not only doing it in the United States, but in different places around the world. At some point, it was the largest landlord in Spain, right? Because the 2008 financial crisis hit very hard Spain specifically. And after that, there's been many other companies like Invitation Homes, Midwood, that I mentioned here, that their specialization has been to buy foreclosed property en masse, and they keep it as a rental unit. They don't sell it. And that allows them to enter this financialization that I will try to just point out later what it is as I close. And then, of course, this emphasizes another crisis that we're in today, which is the democratic crisis, the crisis on democracy. My kids don't actually believe in democracy. I don't know if that happens if you have kids, that's the case, but especially in this country, right? And because all of these rise of financializations and the mega landlords have, I guess, created a psychological environment for tenants that they control the government, right, in many ways or others. And it's undermining the idea that democracy actually works, right, or could work. And so there's a loss, a very important loss here of it. Now, in this graphic, I'm showing what financialization has done since 2022. But again, this started in 2018 with the financial crisis. This is a general average of the United States, right? And what you would see here is the absolute rise of financial capital in the ownership of housing. So it's the black line that you see above. And then you would see that the average rents that the financial owners charge are like really much higher than the rest. Even the chain managed housing that are also part of the graphic. And certainly, you could see the nonprofit type of housing. Well, it has been rising also, like a lot, but not as dramatically as with the financial. And then this brings me back to that idea that we had at the beginning, which is who is renting these things, right? Because if the finance capital is putting housing to rent like this and is buying so much housing, who is actually renting these? And why did it start in 2018? And I will tell you a very fast story about this, which is perhaps one of the main origins of the financialization of housing. Is that at some point, I believe it was in around 2008, there's an organization of international bankers that get together in Basel, in Switzerland, to discuss international things. And one of the things that bankers asked this organization or in this meeting was to allow them to use housing as collateral for giving or lending money. Now, this is, again, this had never happened before in a global perspective, okay, in a global thing. What they were de facto doing is that, a bank went into bankruptcy, Lehman Brothers, in 2008, because it didn't have enough assets to cover what it had lent and so forth, right? And so the governments, what they do is that they institute these kind of benchmarks. Right now, I think a bank has to have 20% of liquid assets in relationship to what they can lend to other people, just to safeguard they don't go bankrupt. Now, with this movement that happened in Basel, it meant that banks now could use the price of housing, your homes, your house, as collateral, as part of that 20% that they need to guarantee to have, right? So that they can lend money. So if they buy 100 houses, then let's say the price of that house is higher. See this graph, right? And that allows them to lend more money, which is their business, right? And so it is of their interest to raise the price of housing so that they could actually lend more money and speculate further, right? And so that aspect of financialization, I think, is perhaps the most important. There are quite a few, but that needs to be addressed in a global campaign. I know that someone in Canada has been doing this. Her name is Leilani Farha. Canada is even more severely rent burdened than the United States. And they started a national campaign on the questions of housing financialization and how much it is affecting our communities. Here in New York, I get emails, targeted emails from Goldman Sachs or whatever, that buy a share in this financialization of housing. So basically what they do is that they buy 100 houses, let's say, in a Black community here in Brooklyn, and they go to people that could invest in them, and they sell them a share of those 100 houses. And they know that I cannot afford a house. So they target me because perhaps I can afford $10,000, which I can't, but assuming, right? And I now have a share in this massive housing, in this mega landlord that has become a bank. And the interest of the bank is obviously to continue to raise the prices so that I actually gain interest rate on this. And so it is a very perverse mechanism that perhaps we can talk a little bit more on. And one thing that perhaps is much more interesting that I'm moving now towards the end of this presentation is the lessons that we have had from below. And I'm sure many of your organizations are working on these now, which are the promotion of land trusts, right? Community land trusts, of housing cooperatives, and permanent affordability, which we always have said is very important. And in state democratic governance in housing models to actually secure that it is a use value and not just an investment, and how to organize for resistance to displacement, how to gather political support. how to expand social movements, and build new institutional allies. Now, I can talk for years on this because this is actually the bread and butter of a lot of the work that we do. But I will leave them as there as points, and I don't want to get into explaining a land trust or the types of different housing cooperatives, because it will take a lot of our time, perhaps in the question if there's a little of that. But what I guess I'm trying to say here, that we do have specific instruments that we can use to fight this, right? And I'm not, that was explanation of the land trust, so I'm not going to go there. And our idea is how to move from a global resistance into not only gentrification, but I would say rent exploitation, and perhaps use the word expropriation of our homes, right, from main capital. We have worked in different places around, and Barcelona is a great example of this. Ada Colau, when she was the mayor, a socialist mayor with a municipalist platform, she created a lot of super interesting policy to battle this idea of rent exploitation. Obviously, rent control has a lot to do with this, but also the empowerment of tenant unions, which is something that we have seen on the rise in the United States, right? But it's not enough. Definitely, it's not enough. In Mexico City, this is why I put there a point in Mexico City, is something that we're working directly with the federal government, but also with the city government, Mexico City government, how to let them empower all of these unions, and how to organize the legal apparatus towards reforms and tactical occupations with social movements. No, I'm going to go, sorry. I might go there if questions arise. And so I will end up with two different slides. And then one says, like, what is this crisis that we're facing and how to address it? The biggest myth that we all hear is that housing is expensive because there is not enough. There's this thing of supply and demand. Well, I can tell you that after that explanation of financialization, you could see why this is not true, right? When the banks own, or the financiers own housing, they make money, more money, by not renting it than by renting it. Meaning they can put it in a finance portfolio and lend money over it, right? And that becomes instant. That I call that housing under this regime has become liquid cash, right? It used to be a time where if one was a landlord, you would need to find a tenant to make money out of that, right? Like you to be a rentier, capitalist to do that. But now we are in the paradigm where that is not necessary for them to actually make money. So in short, a lot of the housing that is being built, a lot of that housing that is super expensive, it is not built for being rented, right? It is being built as a financial asset itself, like any share, right? And this is, I think, something that we need to fight heavily, because the idea of supply and demand happens because most Americans had Economy 101, and they tell them that this is a law, right? And it does not work on the current market. Now, that does not mean that it's not scarcity, right? But I show you this graph that the prices in the US are going up in housing, despite being much more offers, right, in this. And so this is a big debate with YIMBYs, you know, just in my backyard. I've had big debates because a lot of YIMBYs are very much pro, let's build, let's build, let's build. Our agenda has been, yes, we have to build, but it's not just building. We have to create enough instruments so that what you build is actually affordable, right? And it's meant for people and not for finance now. And so this is actually the biggest question, no? And the things that I believe a lot of social movements in the United States and around the world, but the United States is very specific on this, get it wrong, right? Building more housing is not going to solve this situation, right? We are facing a much more, I guess, shady environment, you know, than that. Another thing is that housing inflation is engineered for capital gain, which is what I said, and that's how it is, right? I mean, the prices continue to go up, and then of course we all know this, to Trump people shifting blame to migrants. It's a big thing, right? Migrants are the ones that are making your houses be more expensive, right? Migrants are the ones that are doing these, or they're causing problems because they're lazy, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And people believe it, right? Because how the hell do you understand the financialization of housing? This is where I get very academic, that I think it's very, very important to understand what it's underneath that, because otherwise we'll get to very superficial arguments on and that are not right. And then most and all, as a Marxist, of course, we need to introduce this as part of a class, I guess, war, right? That if we have to say anything about it. We know that there's a rise of transnational movements, which is great, tenant movements specifically. My proposition is that the United States, without their movements unifying, which is a big thing, I know, because I work with many of them and they hate each other all the time. But not only with the locals and regionals, but also with international groups. For example, in Berlin, there is an amazing tenant union. In Barcelona, there's amazing tenant unions. In Mexico City, there is an incredible housing movement that is fighting for cooperatives. In short, this is when it's become finance, it's international capital. This is not about the United States. This is about global capital. And so we cannot not deal with this issue from a local perspective. And that is the most hardest thing to actually get across, specifically to social movements, right? Because a social movement normally is based on an area, right? It's an area-based type of thing. This is capital at an international level. Therefore, the coalitions, we think, must be considered from an international perspective. And that includes, of course, youth engagement, all kinds of solidarity economies, and new visions of what collective property is. So yes, decommodified housing, social infrastructure, participatory governance, eco-social planning. And how we get there is more conflict between your social movements and the things that you represent, because capital divides, and it has been very successful at dividing, specifically in the United States, specifically, how things are. And we need more imagination. I think the biggest crisis might be the crisis of imagination. We feel like it's a hopeless or helpless, type of situation, and in just begin experimenting with different alternatives. I will leave it there for a bunch of other questions that might be recent. I hope it was not too superficial, but I think that's what I had prepared for you guys.
Thank you, Miguel. I mean, I think you did exactly what I was hoping you would do, and really kind of illustrate why housing, I know a lot of the people in this room right now are people who work in social justice in New Jersey, and housing is one of the issues that we tackle. But this is, like you said, not a New Jersey issue. It's not a New York issue. It's not a US issue. It's a global issue. And the reason it is the very point that you made about investors really taking over a lot of the real estate internationally. So I have some questions, but I want to give a chance to, there's a question already in the chat. I believe, let me make sure. Okay. Another, just a comment. This is powerful information, so much to unpack. I'm glad you agree with us, Betsaida. So I have a quick question for you, and hopefully others will chime in as well. So a lot of people, of course, especially now knowing this new lens of this financialization of the housing market, feel helpless and powerless when it comes to housing. So what's one thing you think local communities and local activists can do to shift some of the power balance?
Without question, is tenant unions. Okay, I have seen them scared. I mean, I have seen them in Barcelona specifically, because there's an amazing tenant union that exists in Barcelona, that the bankers were like crazily, scared of them. And so much that they stopped doing, because it just became too difficult for them. So finance capital enters in areas where are fragmented, where there's not organization. And that's the majority of the United States, right? And the majority of the world. But the idea of creating tenant unions is, I think, the most powerful, Maria. And I want to emphasize, it's not having a tenant union that is related to the hyper-local, which is important. But I can only see these really attacking the financialization of housing from the perspective of building like large transnational networks of tenant unions, right? That are coordinated, that work together, that share knowledge, that share new experiences and propositions, to attack them directly, as a people's front, and so on. And another big thing, without doubt, is the development of specific, I guess, pedagogical campaigns in relationship to finance capital. And that's a difficult one because already saying financialization of housing sounds like, what the hell are you talking about? But people need to be aware of these. And that's the thing. What we have found in the working with grassroots groups is that they're not really aware of this. They're aware of this bad landlord that is doing something, and everybody's fighting that bad landlord. But when we're talking about like more in-depth sort of understanding of what's driving the bad landlord, there's very little knowledge about this. And so campaignings are definitely very important for these. I don't know to what level they have been done in the United States. I know that Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi worked a little bit on some campaigns. Also, organized groups in Oakland, in California, were doing these. In New York City, sadly, I have not seen any examples of good organizing, campaigning for these. And then the third, perhaps the most difficult one, is before building urban tenant unions, is you have to come together as social movements. It is very sad to see how divided it is. And I guess it has to do with the way the United States set up the thing that everybody's fighting for the same money. And there's a lot of jealousies within, the leaderships of nonprofits, that you end up being enemies more than and as long as it's fragmented, there's no way that you can do something that will have an impact. And I think that is like one of the biggest questions.
Yeah, certainly not easy, but I do think, like you said, youth involvement and really kind of changing the way people think about all of these issues and the interconnectedness of this, to really kind of, like Casey said in the chat, it's an opportunity for solidarity between worker unions, immigrant organizing groups, all of these social justice movements to come together and really kind of push back on the system that really creates so many of these injustices.
So how could you make this not about your nonprofit, but truly about societal sort of disaster, right?
Yeah.
And I have seen this happen in the United States with hurricanes, with major sort of natural disasters, where suddenly nobody has a T-shirt of the nonprofit, right? But everybody's just helping.
Right.
But for some reason, there's never traction, right? And the numbers that I presented, and they're just a few numbers that I chose, just to emphasize it, but we have even more dramatic numbers, are not enough to make us understand that we're in a catastrophe. It's a social catastrophe. And then more and more, of course, with the new administration, this will get even worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So you briefly mentioned, oh, perfect. Pilar has a question. Great. We'd love to hear from attendees. Pilar?
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting. This actually reminds me of a book I read in my master's program, which is Harvest of Empire, The History of Latinos in America, by Juan Gonzalez, where he talks about the US and other countries similarly being like an empire, right? Like the empires really never stopped. And what colonization has done, and I guess like this presentation on a smaller level is like, this is all a result of this this theme of colonization that has entered in the US from the very get-go, from these British immigrants to this country that came in the Mayflower, etc. And now how it's evolved to this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. The United States certainly has I would say it has very little history, right? Compared to my country, Mexico is like, you're talking like there's Mexico itself as Mexico, right? It has many years developing, right? As a thing. The United States, of course, has thousands of years of history before it was the United States, you know? And of all the indigenous groups that basically steward the territory, right? And when we understand, yes, this terrible power grab that has happened since, as you say, the Mayflower, but I would say this started happening when Christopher Columbus, landed. And it just has been a continuation of this, right? It certainly has been driven to its ultimate consequence. In academia, few of us, right, mentioned David Harvey amongst them, but a few of us mentioned that neo-fascism, which is how I describe what is the Trumpian kind of agenda, is the ultimate consequence of all of these that you're talking about, right? Of these hundreds of years of expropriation and exploitation of peoples, of nature, of cultures, right? And what, from a Marxist perspective, the background is not that is colonialism itself, is that colonialism has been one of the strongest sort of vehicles for capitalist expansion, right? Certainly without colonialism, capitalism would not have existed. But also there are many other things that happened during that time that were part of the development of capitalism as such. I always like to blame it to capital. I know it's very easy, right? And that's how I call myself an anti-capitalist, or more than anything else. But it is a very truthful thing what you say. And one of the things that we're doing, let's see if this serves as an inspiration with the Mexico government, is we did a whole research on indigenous forms of living, right? And my God, how advanced they were. I mean, it's just crazy, right? I mean, all of this destruction of the most amazing forms of sharing, and I would say the stewardship, this symbiotic relationship with nature, the environment, that certainly capitalism doesn't have. And you will see in the history of Mexico, there's this, I guess, formation of a civilization that was called Teotihuacan. If you go to Mexico City, the closest pyramids to it, which are absolutely amazing, is Teotihuacan. Archaeologists have found that is the earliest discovery of equitable living, full equitable living and equitable housing, right? In it, because they basically saw that all citizens lived alike, but all of them had, what they needed. And there was no like big hierarchies and so forth. You have other forms of indigenous organization, right? That were actually the Native Americans that we now call were also part of the Mexico, right? Sort of thing. It's just a big, all the way to Canada, as a matter of fact. A lot of people get very surprised when I tell them that Cherokee Nation and its language is very close to the language of Nahuatl in central areas in Mexico. And they are part of the same group of people, right? So it's not, the country is really it's a continuation of many civilizations that collaborated. Yeah, sometimes they fought, etc. And so yes, we can, and we are finding a lot of inspiration in indigenous forms of organization. And that doesn't mean that we can translate them, but certainly they could provide like this necessary imagination, right? Like to start seeing things from a different light. And I would encourage everyone to do so. There's one book specific that I recommend yeah, it's just amazing. The book it's big, so don't get dissuaded. But it's called The Dawn of Everything, and it's basically a rewriting of history. As if the Western world did not have written history, right? In this case, the colonialist apparatus. And the argument is that the concepts of democracy and the concepts of justice were taken from the indigenous peoples of the Turtle Island of the Americas, right, to Europe via intellectual conversations of indigenous philosophers and Jesuits that were coming to talk to them. Right, and so the word injustice did not exist in Europe as a concept because everything was unjust anyway. You know, again, there was like these huge differences, and so the first time that they start to question these is when the coming of the French Revolution. There was this guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and that started to bring the point of equity and justice. And he was a reader, an avid reader of the scripts of the Jesuits when they were having conversations with the indigenous peoples here, right? And so this book is amazing, The Dawn of Everything. The two authors, one of them is dead. As a Marxist, I should not be recommending him because he was considered an anarchist. He considered himself an anarchist. And he died tragically. He was very young. But he was an archaeologist and an anarchist writing this book about the civilization and how our civilizations before the Spaniards, well, the Portuguese, which were the ones that started with the colonial industry, before that, it was just incredible. And there were so many forms of living, right? And today, the sad part is that we only believe that there's only one way of living. Right? So yeah, I would push a lot into that inspiration because it certainly has inspired me and continues to inspire us. We're working with a lot of indigenous people, and it's just like incredible to learn from them.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it makes me think of, you know, like the idea of the American dream was built on this idea of owning a home, right? And so like it was interesting to hear you say how home is not an investment, home is shelter, to just kind of go back to the basics. And I'm sure a lot of what you described in these indigenous populations, they thought of it as a way to house people and not a way to extract.
Yeah.
So there's some interesting comments in the chat that I'd like to read out loud because I thought they were interesting. And then I was wondering if you could talk about examples where people have sort of taken or have had some control or some say in how housing is addressed through land trusts and co-ops. Would love for you to talk about that. But I'm going to just, you know, see if there's anything that comes to mind as I read some of the comments that are in here. Debbie writes, I live in the Atlantic City area. I have seen a lot of house flipping. I hear of corporate purchasing property, but there are also some groups and entrepreneurs with the Community Foundation of South Jersey supporting efforts that is developing small business. I'm not sure about housing impact. And then Victor says, yes, in Newark, the same private corporations buying up all the large apartment buildings. The city pushes the small business programs, but not enough folks jumping in to start up local. And those that do start up local are not hiring local, which is kind of hurting the preservation efforts. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, definitely. This is not, I mean, obviously housing is, we call it, I mean, there's a member of Urban Front who, he always says that housing is the rice on a paella, right? Is the thing that brings it all together, right? But I guess what is not the rice certainly is the economy, right? That links into this, and it's very sad in some form to see that the majority of programs that are given by, for example, here the Brooklyn Library or other kinds of organizations that focus on economic empowerment, they actually teach competition, and they teach basically how to be a capitalist. I mean, I'm not saying that you can be anything else because this is where we are at, right? But this touches what you were mentioning, Maria, that all of these things need to be reformed into thinking on collective and solidarities, right? Collectives and solidarities.
Right.
It's very different to think of a solidarity economy than an individualist economy. And I don't know many programs that actually do that from a city perspective, right? I know there are some university programs, for example, in New Jersey. I think Rutgers has a program that goes into neighborhoods and teaches something about solidarity economies and so forth. But the interest from like official, I guess, actors is not there, right? I mean, they're teaching you how to build a cooperative. There's incredible organizations in the United States that do these, but it is not sanctioned by governments or sanctioned by more official channels on this. A cooperative in itself is it has a lot of anti-capitalist potential, and at least it shows people how to collectively organize, right? It is an internal form of socialism, right? I mean, like within your cooperative, you're a socialist, but of course the cooperative has to compete, outside to be able to sell whatever thing they do in the cooperative. But nevertheless, there is one thing very important that happens there, that the profit is distributed equally in a cooperative. So capital, as Marxists define it, is the accumulation of wealth in the hands of very few people, right? And so when we talk about the wealth, not a form of accumulation, but wealth as something that has to be redistributed, is very much the principle of cooperativism. Of course, not all cooperativism. Like I tell people that the fanciest apartments you see next to Central Park, right, are all cooperatives, and people are like, what? And especially cooperative organizations in the South, and yeah, they are cooperatives, and the same with land trusts, Maria. To add to these, the land trust movement actually started because the land trust, something that very wealthy people created to, I guess, secure the management of their wealth, right? And then it was taken by some, very interesting people to say, hey, we can use this model, right? And enact some kind of land trust. I think more than land trusts, the future has to be cooperative, right? And the cooperative, it's the first mode of action, individual action that we can do to combat this. For doing the thing that I mentioned before, the tenant unions, or the organizing of tenant unions and international networks, that's something you do. You have to start doing collectively. It's not something you do as an individual, but saying like I'm going to be part of a cooperative, it's also an individual act as well as it's a collective act. So this is something that we can actually all start, and I can recommend to you an organization that is called Platform Cooperativism, which is it's international, it's very large, that basically helps people that want to start cooperatives, right? I think that all universities should be cooperatives. Like we've been in a campaign that my university becomes a cooperative, right? And then send to hell the nonprofit status, right? That we all talk about, and which is going to change, I fear, a lot with the Trump administration. The land trust and other forms of I say, alternative housing or alternative movements are very difficult because you need a specific legal apparatus to actually promote or empower the creation of these things. I always say that in New York City, the most famous community land trust is Cooper Square Community Land Trust. It's infamous. I mean, like almost everybody in housing is like, oh, Cooper Square. I have the fortune or misfortune that my wife is as a member of the board of directors of that land trust. And it has existed since the 1970s. There have been endless groups that have tried to mimic that. And I would say, sadly, none of them have been able to do it so far. And the reason for this is because the Cooper Square Community Land Trust at that period of time in the 70s could have access to free land because, you know, New York was burning or like was in bankruptcy and all of that, right? And so the city needed to dispose of things and to, you know, to give people things. But without that land, the land trust does not exist. Now I basically say, how are you going to get the land, right, in today's context, you know, where even the cities are speculators of this. And so I guess what we're trying to say, what I'm trying to say is that there is a lot of value in a lot of alternative modalities that we can learn and create new forms that adapt themselves better to the context of today. We in my organization, we have done a few that combine cooperatives with mutual housing associations, with land trust and so on, but they're more akin to the territory, to the conditions of the city that you're working on, et cetera, right? And so the key of like self-organization under cooperatives is, I think, yeah, like super important. All of us can actually do that, right? It's just a matter of deciding to do it, and not be afraid.
About it, right?
Yeah.
And also knowing about the option, the alternative, right? Just learning about it. There's a great question in the chat, and I want to see what you think about it. Why do you think Congress did not pass the bill, the Housing is a Human Right Act? And what did we learn from this loss to continue to advocate for this human right?
Yeah, that's a very nice question. I mean, very important question. Yeah, one of the few things that I have been very involved in is, of course, lobbying to governments. But we took a specific decision in Urban Front where we only work with progressive governments. And that means that we are not working with any American municipality government or anything, because we don't think there's a truly progressive government that we know of, actually, in the United States. And we work with governments, you know, that, for example, Mexico right now, we're working from different municipalities in other places in Europe and also in Northern Africa, but in South America. But the thing is that we are very busy pushing for a specific laws, right? Now, on the question of passing the right to housing, or it's very similar to passing the right to animals or the right to nature, the right to territory, which none of those have passed. And my view on this is that it's just a very symbolic negation, right? Again, passing a law that creates a rubric that says that we all have a right to housing, without passing the different normatives and like more economic and political and social sort of things that need to occur for these to actually be an empowered situation. And just think about now and also many litigations that exist on Trump's, you know, complete, yeah, I don't even have a word for it, but like all the things that he's doing. They're basing on laws that don't have very much specifics, right? They're all these amendments to the Constitution are very generic, and they're supposed to be like very specific, you know, things that describe exactly what it's doing. Well, a lot of that is missing. If we see the HUD's, I guess, HUD's framework, policy framework, it's actually terrible. It's still very racist, as it has always been. You know, HUD was created under the basis of segregation, right? And it still continues to have that agenda. And these specific ways in which HUD functions, in my view, are much more important than having a general article of the Constitution that says the right to housing. Look, Ecuador did it. Mexico City has its own constitution, and they also passed the right to housing. Brazil also has it. Not much has happened in that line, right? Because the nitty-gritty, I guess, is not developed now. So I would spend much more time developing or lobbying for, I would say, sub laws or legislation than for a major legislation, and a legislator knows that that is the most important. So you could see different people in the state of New York, which I know, is organizing around a big nonprofit that has them together to pass these laws of that gave us actually the tenant laws that we have now. They were more busy in this tenant like nitty gritty, right, laws that passed in 2019 and than anything else, right? And so there is no big declaration of New York has the right to housing, even though they have the big declaration to the right to shelter. But look how it is, like, the right to shelter, I'd rather not be in it there, because it's, those of you that have been in the shelter, I have been not as a but a visitor, as a person to talk to. I wouldn't desire this and not even my worst enemy, right? To be in such conditions. And again, there is a law to the right to shelter. So I guess that's how I would, begin to address it.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm reading some of the comments, and I think it's interesting. People are saying, we're at a critical time where unhoused are being criminalized. So you mentioned that housing is being built, and it's just being built to create profit, not meant for people to live in, and yet these unhoused people who don't have a place to live in are now being criminalized. So I just want to comment your thoughts on that. And I want to leave, because we're at 3:52. A last thought or question for you is, in your podcast Cities After, I love the title Cities After, because the idea is of reimagined city, right? What that would look like. I wonder if you could give us some hopeful final thoughts on what a city shaped by residents would actually look like. So just your thoughts on the criminalization.
I think that there is not one way that it should look like. I think all of your cities, all of your towns and neighborhoods where you live have its own very special way of being, right? And it is about having that special way of being that is bring to the priority, prioritizing that over, I guess, profit in this case, right? What we're talking about, which seems like an impossible task under, we're in capitalist structure. I think of this a lot, because when we do presentations to governments, when we have a proposition, we have to tell them, like, look, this is the city of the future, right? I mean, this is what we have to do. Without doubt, the city of the future has to start with collectivization, right? A lot of Americans don't know that suburbs, the first American suburb, or what you were talking, Maria, about the American dream, was actually a political decision, right? It happened under, the biggest support of it happened under McCarthy. So you might know McCarthyism a little bit, right? And there's a lot of hearings that happened with McCarthy and the housing developers. And at that period, which it was being discussed that the most efficient form of developing housing was a little bit what the Europeans were doing and the Latin Americans were doing, which is collective housing, right? And McCarthy pretty much argued in these sessions that collectivized forms of housing are communist and are socialist, that America should have a capitalist, form. And he argued that suburbia was the most capitalist form of living, and that the environment itself would actually condition its people to become better capitalists. Now, if you think about these suburbia, it's an individual plot of land where you have a separation from your neighbor, right? And where you, according to the private property laws, are going to defend with your guns, right? Like, nobody touches my property. And it creates also very specific competitiveness around this. But most importantly, what McCarthy saw very clearly was that that if you live closer together, you have much more opportunities to organize. And what he saw in suburbia is that where people are so sparse and divided, they don't talk to each other, so they cannot organize against, anything. And this is the why Levitt brothers. I mean, McCarthy became a very big supporter of the Levitt brothers that started Levittown, close to where we are, right? And so as the first kind of model for this. And so the question here is how to collectivize, or how to begin collectivization. It's more than just thinking, oh yeah, the city of the future is like super sustainable, and everybody can afford housing and so on. We have to start from the very beginning and teach ourselves to act collectively and to think the city as a collective, because that's the magic of cities, right? That's actually what at least for me they bring me, is that, and that doesn't mean like marrying with your neighbors, right? This means having, I guess, a consciousness that is a collective consciousness, no, and taking away all that individual consciousness that this country is very good at pushing us to have, right? Like we don't care about the others as long as it doesn't happen to us, right? That is the most selfish and individualist form of thinking. But sadly, many of us think this way many times, right? And so to answer your question, I know this is not what you wanted, Maria, but I can say, yeah, it's form of, communities and cooperatives and land trust and, sustainable means and all of that. Yes, we know that has to be the city of the future, but all of these other things are useless without working on collectivizing. And that includes, of course, what I mentioned is cooperatives. That includes, of course, the campaigns that I was mentioning against financialization, right? And that, of course, means also tenant unions, right? And which is collectivizing, right? So the city of the future is collective. That's what I want to say.
Miguel, I didn't have an answer, but I think that is perfect, because I do agree with you. And I think what we learned in the pandemic was that buildings are just buildings and cities are just cities, right? Without the people that really shape them. And I think the values is what you're getting to, is this value of collectivism being important, because that guides the decisions that people make. And if you're making decisions collectively, then you're deciding on what's best for that collective. So I completely agree with you. I want to we have about 3 minutes. I would love to ask, there's so many comments in the chat. If anyone wants to share some of the aha moments that you've had from Professor Robles-Durán's presentation, we'd love to hear from you. Anyone? No?
Oh, it's
Okay.
Saida here.
Yes.
Yeah, really quickly, I just want to say that this has been such an eye-opener on the other side of the coin, because I am one of the people that work with the American Red Cross in the realm of disaster response, and housing is a major issue, and listening to the other side of the coin and understanding, getting a little better understanding of what causes these deficiencies, and how I know about greed. We know what happens, and my job may not be the political realm, but what you guys have opened up for me today is really special. I'd like to continue to listen and learn. And I don't quite know on behalf of the Red Cross how that would look, but I know as a personal individual, it's been great to listen to. So thank you.
Thank you, Betsaida. Thank you for sharing. And Jacqueline.
Yes, hi everyone. I've worked in this space dealing with the unhoused, as I wrote in the comments most recently on a project. And I am going to do my part in how I've already started in sharing this recording with some of the county and city elected officials, because having this just in a briefing that can be listened to help others understand these different models that can be incorporated into the conversation on how to minimize and eliminate the increase in the unhoused is very important, because so many people just don't know what to do. They don't know the right way to approach it, or they choose to ignore it because they're sustaining the system that's designed to be this way. And then they don't want people to be educated and know about these different models. So the more awareness we have, the more we share, the more organizations have workshops discussing this and educating people that this is by design and that there are ways for us to combat this system by organizing collectively, lobbying, and whatever way, as Betsaida said in her own area of work, is how we can really start to build mass movements, local and national, international. So thank you, I'm grateful.
Thank you,
I will
Jacqueline.
respond very fastly to this that you said. The capitalist class is super organized at a global level. We're never going to achieve anything against them powerful enough if we don't do that.
Agreed.
100%. Thank you so much, Professor Miguel Robles-Durán. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I'm always learning from you. And so if you have a chance, check out Miguel's podcast, Cities After. It's available on all streaming platforms. There are links in the chat on how to follow Professor Miguel's work. And also stay connected with us. We have some great programming in regards to what Professor shared about collectivism. We are doing a participatory democracy briefing in the fall. So if you want to learn about what collectivism can look like and what those values might look like, please join us for that. And thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Professor Robles-Durán, for your partnership in today's briefing. I know I learned so much. I hope you all got to see another side of the housing crisis on an international level. So thanks again. Have a wonderful
Thank you
day.
all. Pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank